Hello, social studies superstars. So last week we wrapped up talking about the three branches of the government. It was the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. That's hard to say sometimes, judicial. And those are the three different branches of our government as laid out in the United States Constitution. Remember, they got together, they figured out what should this brand new government be? How are we going to run this country? And so they created the Constitution. It included those three branches, and they hashed out all those details. And then they were done. And the Constitution was ratified, or rather made official and completely accepted and adopted by the year 1788. Well, here's what's interesting about the Constitution. It can change. They can add stuff to the Constitution. They can remove stuff in a strange way by adding stuff that therefore removes the old stuff. So we can make changes to our Constitution. And after just a year, we realized, oh, something's missing. So that's what we're going to be taking a look at this week. The Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments or the first 10 changes to the Constitution. So let's go ahead and dive in. Here's our learning target. I can examine why the Bill of Rights was added to the United States Constitution. That's what we're going to focus on in this video, is just why they added it in the first place and kind of how that went down. Future videos will talk about what the actual Bill of Rights says, okay? So a little bit of history behind the Bill of Rights. Remember that guy? Probably not. His name is James Madison. Now, does it ring a bell? Maybe. James Madison was the guy who took most of the notes at the Constitutional Convention. He's the one who's considered the father of the Constitution because he basically had like most of the ideas and wrote down most of the stuff. So James Madison is like the Constitution man. And he realized that while the Constitution was solid, something was missing. You see, the entire Constitution was all about the government. Like, how does the government run? How does the government run the country? What are the different jobs of the different branches, and how does it all work? That's what was laid down in the Constitution. But do you remember the first three words of the Constitution in the preamble, right? That introduction? We the people, right? The government is the people. We are the United States government. Like, that's where a government gets its power. Yet, that's like the only time, those first three words, that the people were actually addressed. And so James Madison is realizing, hold on a minute, we forgot about the people. We started off strong by saying we, the people of the United States, nor form or more perfect union, establish justice, turn domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, secure the blessings and liberty of ourselves and our posterity, to do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. There's the preamble, we the people. But we then forgot about the people in the rest of the Constitution. So a couple years later, after writing the Constitution, James Madison is like, I think we need to add some stuff. And not everyone was super keen on this, but James Madison thought maybe we should spell out what the rights of the people are. We did a really good job of detailing the responsibilities of the different branches of the government, but what about the people's rights? And believe it or not, some politicians at the time were like, nah, because if we tell people what their rights are, then they might know. and then they might use their rights. We don't want the people to know what they can do, because then they might do it. And Madison is like, nah, I think this is actually a pretty good idea. So at the time, there were two different groups of people. There were what we call Federalists and Anti-Federalists. Those were the political parties back then. Today, we have Republicans and Democrats. Back then, they had Federalists and Anti-Federalists. And a federalist was somebody who wanted a really, really strong central United States government. They wanted the US government to be super powerful. That was a federalist. They were like, give the power to the government. That way the government can do stuff, right? Which is a good idea because remember, the Articles of Confederation failed. We needed a constitution because the government wasn't powerful enough. So the Federalists were onto something there, saying we need a strong government. But the Anti-Federalists were the opposite. The Anti-Federalists wanted the people to have more of the power. They wanted not necessarily a weak government, but they didn't want the government to be super duper strong and powerful because they wanted to put that into the hands of the states themselves and the people living in the country to kind of decide our own fate. So Federalists and Anti-Federalists both have a point, right? And that's why they existed back then, to share those ideas and then ultimately come up with compromises. Remember how compromise was a big deal in the Constitution? So the Federalists, like I said, they wanted a really, really strong government. And so James Madison said, oh, don't worry. If we add a Bill of Rights, if we spell out what the rights of the people are, that will not change the government's power. We're not going to take away power from the government. We're just going to tell the people what they can do. That's it. But then the Anti-Federalists were worried that, well, if we list the rights of the people, then will that be the only things the people will be able to do? So the Anti-Federalists were worried that the Bill of Rights would maybe be too specific. And then that would be the only thing that the people could do, and they couldn't do more, right? So an example would be like, if you are trying to decide what to do in the afternoon and you come up with a list of options, you're like, well, I could go outside, or I could play video games, or I could eat a snack. Well, those aren't the only things that you could do, but some people be like, you chose another option that wasn't on the list, so you can't do that. And so that's what the Anti-Federalists were worried about, that if we spelled out the rights of the people, then would that limit the people's rights? And again, James Madison is like, no, I'm not going to limit the rights of the people. I'm just going to inform them what their rights are. I'm actually going to be protecting their freedom, not limiting it, not restricting it. And so after a lot of debate and arguing in Philadelphia, in again, that famous hall where all the things got done, Independence Hall, the Federalists and Anti-Federalists kind of argued and debated, and then they ultimately decided, yes, let's add 12 amendments to the Constitution. And so they created a list of 12 things that they wanted to change or add to the Constitution. That's what an amendment is. An amendment is something that you add or a change to something. So on December 15th, 1791, so after a few years of talking about these issues, they finally said, yeah, let's add 10 of those 12 ideas. And so they did that. If you're wondering about the other two, they actually had nothing to do with people's rights. So they were like, well, these two are different, so let's not pass them right now. So they just focused on the 10 that actually had to do with people's rights. The other two had to do with the size and pay of Congress. And one of them ended up finally becoming the 27th Amendment, which was, I think, recently passed within your lifetime. So isn't that funny that an amendment that they proposed back in 1791 was finally passed in our modern era as the 27th Amendment. I don't remember exactly when the 27th Amendment was passed, but it was relatively recently in the grand scheme of history. So isn't that funny that it took that long to make some of those changes? In the meantime, plenty of other amendments have been added. Like I said, we've got 27 amendments, but the Bill of Rights are the first 10. So the first 10 amendments of the Constitution are known as the Bill of Rights, and they are all about the rights of the people. What are we entitled to? What are things that we have because we are citizens of the United States? And that's what the Bill of Rights are. So we're going to be diving in and looking more at that. So there you go. We examined the Bill of Rights, how it was added to the United States Constitution.